All right, you ready for this? I think you're going to find this deep dive pretty fascinating. We've got such a mix of stuff to go through this time.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
Yeah, but it's really cool. Okay, so we have this YouTuber and his take on inflation.
Oh, and tariffs. Don't forget the tariffs.
Right. Plus, this personal finance expert who's got some, I'd say bold market predictions, some pretty bold ones. Oh, and he sprinkles in some political commentary too. Throws in a few dad jokes along the way. Gotta love those.
Keeps it lighthearted.
Right. And then we've got a real estate podcast that's, well, they're getting pretty real about achieving financial freedom through real estate. And then to round it all out, we have this, well, this sobering report about the California wildfires and what that means for insurance, which is, well, a lot of people are worried about that.
Big concern.
Yeah, so it seems like kind of a lot, I know. But don't worry, we're going to break it all down for you. We're going to tease out the most important things for you.
That's right. It's like finding those hidden gems.
Exactly. So the question is, how are these seemingly totally random topics connected? Well, stay tuned and you'll find out. I think you'll be surprised by some of the insights we've got for you.
For example, you know how everyone's worried about inflation, right?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we're going to look at how the Trump administration's policies might actually be making it worse. Who would have thought?
Definitely some unexpected consequences there.
And get this, AI-powered agents.
AI, what, like in customer service?
Exactly. They might be the future of customer service. Imagine that.
Wow. Okay, and then I know a lot of our listeners are into real estate.
Sure.
So we'll dig into whether that dream of, financial freedom through real estate is actually achievable or just a myth.
And buckle up for this one. A tiny fish.
What?
A tiny fish might be impacting California's ability to fight those wildfires.
Seriously?
Yeah, you'll have to wait and see how that all unfolds.
Okay, so much to unpack here. Let's dive right in.
Let's tackle inflation first. This YouTuber, he doesn't hold back. He's basically saying, remember all those worries about inflation we had a while back? Well, they're back.
Yeah. And he really emphasized that it's not just a theory anymore. It's happening. It's like inflation is back. He pointed out that inflation started ticking up at the end of last year, and now even the government is admitting that their COVID stimulus spending might have something to do with it.
And then you know who admitted it?
Who?
Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary. She basically said, oops, maybe we spent a little too much.
Really? Wow.
And this is where it gets real for everyone listening. So as Treasury yields go up, borrowing costs follow suit. Think about things like mortgages, right? Car loans, those everyday things we need. Suddenly, they become a lot more expensive.
The domino effect, right?
Exactly. And the YouTuber, he brings up another big worry, something we need to watch out for. Government spending. He mentioned the U.S. deficit in 2024 was, get this, the third largest in history.
Oh, wow. Yeah, with all that COVID spending, it's like
they opened the floodgates, and now it's a struggle to close them. So it makes you wonder, is the government spending out of control? And if so, could that push inflation even higher?
It's a scary thought, for sure. And then he brought up something I hadn't really considered before about, Trump administration policies. Specifically, he was talking about trade, all those tariffs Trump put in place. He's concerned about what that means for prices. And then there's immigration.
Right. He even suggested that deportations could actually disrupt the labor market. Imagine that, a labor shortage. It would drive up wages, which could lead to, you guessed it, more inflation.
That's a perspective I hadn't really thought about. It's like you said, those unintended consequences. You try to do one thing and then
it backfires.
Yeah. And speaking of reactions, it seems like even the Federal Reserve is starting to sweat a little.
Oh, absolutely. In the minutes from their January meeting, the Fed actually said they're worried about how changes in trade and immigration could impact inflation. And remember, they have the power to, fiddle with those interest rates.
So what are they doing about it?
Well, they've decided to ease up on those interest rate cuts. At first, they were planning on several cuts this year, but now they're only doing 2. Our YouTuber buddy, he's not impressed. He's like, why cut it all if you're worried about inflation?
Yeah, good question. It seems like they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. They want to boost the economy, but they also don't want prices to skyrocket.
It's like walking a tightrope, one wrong move.
And you're in trouble. Okay, let's switch gears for a minute. Let's talk about something a bit more, futuristic.
Okay, I like where this is going.
This personal finance expert you sent, he's super excited about artificial intelligence, AI, in the market.
AI. What, like robots taking over Wall Street?
Not quite. He's specifically talking about what he calls agent-style stocks.
Okay, break that down for me. What exactly are agent-style stocks?
Well, think about it like this. It's AI that acts as your agent, like anticipating your needs, offering you solutions before you even know you need them.
So it's a step beyond those basic chatbots we see everywhere now.
Exactly. It's like having a super smart personal assistant, but for your finances.
Yeah.
And he actually thinks these agent-style stocks could be a really smart investment. He makes a distinction between companies that are like the core of this idea. He's about the big players like Salesforce, Microsoft, those kinds of companies. They're already weaving AI into all their platforms.
Right. So what about the smaller companies?
Well, that's what he calls the high pricing power companies. They're kind of flying under the radar, but they could have massive growth potential.
So any specific examples that come to mind?
Yeah. He mentioned a few that caught my attention, like MongoDB, Confluent, and UiPath. What they all have in common is this focus on building platforms that can, like, handle this personalized predictive AI. It's the infrastructure that makes this whole agent revolution possible.
Interesting. So for investors listening, what should they be looking for?
Good question. He highlighted 3 key things to watch for on companies that could really benefit from this agent movement. First, high pricing power, meaning can they charge a premium for what they offer because it's so unique and valuable? Second, proprietary data. They need data that gives them an edge, data that helps their AI understand customers better than anyone else.
And third?
He said, look for those building what he called walled garden platforms, a bit of a tech term. But it means they're creating these ecosystems that keep users, well, locked in, basically. It makes it hard to switch to a competitor. Think like Apple's App Store or everything Google does. That kind of control, it's huge in the AI world, especially when you're talking about these agents.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah, so it sounds like this whole agent movement could really shake things up across all kinds of industries.
Sure.
What jumped out at you from his predictions?
Well, he warned that, a lot of those AI sectors are probably already fully priced in, meaning investors have already anticipated the growth. But there's still a lot of potential in those high pricing power companies, the ones where the impact of this whole agent thing hasn't really been factored in yet.
Right, it's not just about jumping on the AI bandwagon. You got to be strategic.
Exactly. It's about understanding the finer points and picking out those companies that are truly ready to capitalize on this shift.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to something a little closer to home for a lot of people, real estate. We've got this real estate podcast you shared, and they're having this pretty honest conversation about whether you can actually reach financial freedom through real estate.
Yeah, they really debunk that whole get-rich-quick myth, which honestly I appreciated. One of the hosts actually quit their job to go all in on real estate.
Wow, that's a big leap.
Right. But even they admitted they're not financially free yet. They're still, hustling, making ends meet. It's a good reality check for anyone who thinks real estate is this guaranteed path to early retirement. They emphasize that while real estate can definitely help you build wealth, it's not necessarily a fast track to financial independence. It's a long game, and you need a smart strategy.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that the other host on the podcast has a totally different approach. They kept their day job while investing in real estate on the side. So you get these 2 contrasting viewpoints, which I thought was really helpful.
It's always good to hear different perspectives, right?
Definitely. And they both stress the importance of having some kind of active income, whether it's a regular job, freelance work, or even something within the real estate business itself, like flipping houses or managing properties. It's all about building a solid foundation while your real estate portfolio grows.
So it's not an either situation. It's about finding a balance that works for you.
Right. It's not about picking one path over another. It's about figuring out what fits your risk tolerance, your goals, your lifestyle, all of that.
What I found insightful was their emphasis on the long game. They both agreed that real estate isn't about getting rich quickly. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It's about having patience and persistence and being willing to adapt as the market changes. There's no magic formula. It's like anything worthwhile, right? It takes time and effort. Exactly. And a willingness to put in the work.
And they were really big on having a realistic timeline. It's not like you're going to achieve total financial freedom in a few years. Building a solid portfolio takes time.
It's a process, for sure.
Right. It's about slowly becoming more financially independent over time. So you can gradually rely less and less on that active income as your investments grow.
It's about shifting that mindset from quick wins to long-term growth.
Right. Real estate's a great tool, but it's not like winning the lottery.
Definitely not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Exactly. So, yeah, maybe that whole retire early through real estate dream isn't realistic for most people.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean real estate's not valuable. It's all about perspective.
And knowing what you're getting yourself into.
Right. Okay, let's switch gears to something a bit heavier. The California wildfires. The report you sent, it paints a really stark picture. Thousands of acres burned, homes destroyed, lives lost. It's devastating.
It's a brutal reminder of how powerful nature can be and how climate change is making these events even worse.
One thing that really stuck with me was about the Palisades fire. They talked about this theory that it was actually reignited from an old burn scar from a previous fire back on New Year's Eve.
Yeah, burn scars, they can be a real problem.
It's scary, right? I mean, I knew wildfires were unpredictable, but the idea that an old burn scar could reignite days or even weeks later is it's unsettling.
And they can stay hot for a while, too. Sometimes up to 10 days. All it takes is a little wind, like those embers in a fireplace. You blow on them and suddenly,
woof.
yeah, they burst back into flames, and then it spreads like wildfire.
Ugh, it's terrifying. And the report mentioned that the response from firefighters was delayed, partly because of budget cuts and a lack of resources. They said it took a full 25 minutes for fire trucks to even arrive at the Palisades fire after it was reported.
Wow, 25 minutes. That's a lot of time for a fire to spread.
Exactly. And by then it was already huge. It just makes you think about how important it is to be prepared and have the resources to fight these fires.
Absolutely, especially in a place like California where wildfires are becoming more and more common.
The report also pointed to all that dry, unmanaged land around the burn scar. They basically said it was a tinderbox, ready to go up in flames.
It makes you think about land management practices, right? How we can prevent these fires from happening in the first place, or at least make them less severe.
Right. And that's where the whole debate about California's environmental policies comes in. The report mentioned this tiny fish, the Delta smelt.
The Delta smelt.
Yeah, it lives in the San Francisco Bay.
Yeah.
And it's endangered. There are all these regulations to protect it, which means a certain amount of fresh water has to flow through the Delta. But that water could potentially be used for firefighting.
Oh, wow. So you've got this endangered fish on one hand and communities at risk from wildfires on the other. That's a tough one.
Right. It's about balancing competing interests. How do you decide which one takes priority?
It shows how even well-intentioned policies can have unintended consequences.
Yeah, it really highlights the need for a more nuanced approach to environmental issues, one that takes into account both the ecological needs and the human needs.
It's a complex issue, for sure.
The report also talked about California's aging water infrastructure. A lot of it was built way back in the early 1900s and hasn't kept up with the state's growth. They said California has plenty of reservoirs, but a lot of water gets wasted because of these outdated systems.
So even though California gets a fair amount of rain, it can't capture and store enough water.
Exactly. And then you have this growing population, a huge agriculture industry, and these increasingly demanding firefighting efforts. It's just not enough. And they use Lake Tulare as an example. It used to be this massive freshwater lake, the biggest one west of the Mississippi. Can you believe that?
No way.
Yeah. But it was drained back in the early 1900s to make way for farmland, and now it's basically gone.
Wow, that's a huge change.
It was good for agriculture at the time, but it created a whole bunch of problems down the road. The soil got all salty, which makes it harder to grow crops, and the ecosystem was disrupted. It just made the water situation in California even more complicated.
It's a classic case of short-term thinking leading to long-term consequences.
Exactly. And speaking of consequences, let's talk about the financial side of these wildfires. The report really dug into how much it's costing insurance companies, billions of dollars in claims, and as a result, a lot of them are pulling out of California completely.
It makes sense from a business perspective. As wildfires become more frequent and more destructive, insurance companies have to reevaluate their risk, especially in places like California.
The report said State Farm, for example, canceled over 72,000 policies in California last year, including 30,000 for homes.
And Allstate isn't even offering new policies in high-risk areas anymore. That's got to be a tough pill to swallow for homeowners who are trying to find affordable insurance.
Totally. And what's even crazier is that this isn't just a California problem. Insurance companies operate all over the country, so when they lose a ton of money in one place, they often make up for it by raising premiums everywhere else.
Right, so it's like a ripple effect. What happens in California impacts people all across the U.S.
It's true. It happened to me. I live in Las Vegas, And my homeowner's insurance was canceled last year because of the California wildfires.
What?
Can you believe that? What's happening hundreds of miles away is affecting my insurance rates.
Wow, that's crazy. It just goes to show how interconnected we all are.
So if you're a homeowner in California and you can't find insurance, what do? The report mentioned the California Fair Plan. It's a state-run program that offers insurance to high-risk homeowners who can't get it anywhere else.
That sounds like a lifeline for some people.
It is, but it's also kind of like a last resort. The premiums are way higher, sometimes double what you'd pay for regular insurance, and the coverage isn't always great.
So even if you do manage to get insurance, you might not be fully covered. It's a tough spot for homeowners.
It really is. They're facing these rising costs, this constant threat of wildfires. It's stressful.
And it's not just the financial burden, it's the emotional toll, too. Living with that fear, it's got to be tough.
Absolutely. And it's even impacting the housing market. The report said that a lot of wealthy homeowners, the ones who can afford to move, are actually leaving California. They're tired of the fire risk and the crazy insurance
I
costs.
can't blame them. Who wants to live with that kind of stress all the time?
Right. But when people leave, property values go down, and that means less property tax revenue for the state. And then that affects funding for schools, infrastructure, all that stuff.
It's a vicious cycle.
Totally.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I want to circle back to something our personal finance expert talked about. Remember when we were discussing those agent-style stocks and the potential of AI?
Yeah, what about it?
Well, he brought up something else, bond yields.
Yeah.
And it actually connects back to our conversation about inflation.
Right. He pointed out that bond values have been tanking while yields have been soaring.
Exactly. And it's all because of this uncertainty in the economy right now.
A lot of people are talking about potential economic growth because of Trump's policies, the tax cuts and deregulation. But like we said earlier, that growth could lead to higher inflation. And then there's the whole trade war thing and what those tariffs might do, and how immigration policies might affect the labor market.
It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded.
Right. Investors are reacting to all this uncertainty by pricing it into bond yields. They're basically hedging their bets.
It's interesting because some experts, like the ones quoted in that Wall Street Journal article you shared, they think this uncertainty could actually be good for bond investors.
Really? How so?
They're saying that since everyone is expecting economic growth, there's not much downside protection in the market. So if the economy were to take a dip, bonds would become the safe haven asset.
So it's a contrarian view, but it's definitely something to consider.
Okay, so we've covered inflation, AI, real estate, wildfires, even bond yields. It's amazing how all these seemingly random topics are connected, right?
It's all part of this big, complex web we're all caught in.
And what really ties it all together is the theme of government policy and leadership.
From that YouTuber's critique of government spending to the real estate podcast's take on what's happening in California, it's clear that the decisions made in Washington have a huge ripple effect on everyone.
And it's especially evident when we look at the California wildfires. The report talked about the controversy surrounding California's environmental policies, specifically those dealing with water management. The whole thing with the Delta smelt, that's a perfect example. They're trying to protect this endangered species, but some people argue that it's prioritizing one species over the needs of a whole population that's facing drought and fire risk.
Right. It raises some serious questions about those unintended consequences again.
We need leaders who can balance the needs of the environment with the needs of the people.
Leaders who can make tough decisions,
And the report highlighted how slow the firefighters were to respond, partly because of budget cuts and a lack of resources. It makes you wonder if enough is being done to prepare for these wildfires.
It really underscores the need for responsible policymaking. We need leaders who are thinking about the long-term well-being of their communities and the environment.
And are willing to adapt as the world changes.
Exactly. This deep dive has been quite a ride, hasn't it? We've explored inflation, AI, real estate, those devastating California wildfires.
It's a lot to take in, but I hope it's been helpful. Hopefully you've gotten some valuable insights.
We've seen how all these things are interconnected and how understanding those connections can help us make better decisions. Not just financial decisions, but decisions about how we live our lives, how we prepare for the future.
And how we can build a more resilient future.
Mm-hmm.
And we can't forget about climate change. It's a big one. Those California wildfires, they're a wake-up call. These climate-related disasters are happening more and more often.
Yeah, and the costs. both financial and human. They're just staggering. We need to start being proactive.
Right.
Think about mitigating the risks, building some resilience. It's not just about reacting after the fact. It's about preventing these things from happening in the first place.
So what can we do? What kind of proactive measures are we talking about here?
Well, think about your own home, right? Fire-resistant landscaping, creating defensible space around your property, having an evacuation plan ready to go. These are things everyone can do.
Those are all great tips. It's about taking responsibility, protecting yourself, your family, your property. But what about the bigger picture? What can we do as a community, as a country, to tackle these challenges?
We got to invest in renewable energy, that's for sure. We can't keep relying on fossil fuels. It's time to switch to clean energy sources. And supporting policies that promote sustainability, that's crucial too.
So it's about making smart choices, right? As consumers, as citizens, supporting businesses that are doing the right thing, voting for policies that align with our values.
Absolutely. And we need leaders who are on board with this, leaders who are willing to invest in solutions that benefit both the environment and the economy. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
We can have both, a healthy planet and a thriving economy.
Exactly. This whole deep dive has really shown how everything is connected. Economics, technology, government policies, even natural disasters, it's all intertwined. It's a lot to wrap your head around, but hopefully you've gained some insights, maybe some food for thought.
I hope so. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is this: knowledge is power.
The more we understand about these issues, the better decisions we can make. For ourselves, our families, our communities.
Before we go, I want to leave you with one last question to ponder. How do we balance that desire for individual financial freedom with our responsibility to address climate change and create a more sustainable future?
It's a tough one, right?
It is. It's a question that makes us think beyond our own needs. We got to consider the long-term well-being of our planet, the kind of world we're leaving for future generations. It's about finding a path that balances personal goals with collective responsibility.
A path forward together.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you'll keep exploring these topics, keep asking questions, keep the conversation going.
Stay curious, stay engaged, stay informed. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the most fascinating and thought-provoking issues of our time.
Until then, thanks for diving in with us.